Welcome to Making the Most of Co-ops. My name is Demetrius Katos, and I'm the Director of Giving in College Initiatives at the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, which is your students' home college here at Northeastern. This afternoon's event will give you, our students' parents, an opportunity to learn about Northeastern's signature co-op program and have answered any questions you may have about it. Our program comprises 3 brief presentations of about 5 to 7 minutes duration from each of our 3 speakers. And this will be followed by question and answer session. So at this time, I'd like to begin our event by introducing our event's parent host, Alice Chinebuah. Alice Chinebuah is Managing Partner and Director at Reynolds C & Company, a firm of solicitors and advocates in Accra, Ghana. She represents corporate clients in civil and commercial law matters with a focus on contract law, corporate governance, both advisory and compliance, and restructuring. She is a member of the Ghana Bar Association and a solicitor and advocate of the Supreme Court of Ghana. Alice has been actively involved with the education of her 4 children, and she currently serves as a member of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities Dean's Strategy Council. The Dean's Strategy Council is an advisory and philanthropic committee of leading college alumni, parents, and friends that support the college and the university's initiatives. Alice's daughter, Kezia, is a senior at Northeastern with a combined major in criminal justice and psychology. Her most recent co-op was at the Judge Baker Children's Center in spring 2022, where she was the clinical assistant in youth mental health. She previously completed a co-op in human resources at Arrow Street Capital. Please welcome Alice.
Oh, Demetrius, many thanks indeed for the introduction and for the opportunity to share my perspective of the Northeastern Co-op as a parent. Well, hello, everyone. It's past 9 p.m. here. So from me, it's good evening from warm Accra, and it's a real pleasure to meet everybody here. So as Demetrius has mentioned, I am a Northeastern parent of a student in the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, class of 2023, majoring in psychology and criminal justice. Yes, she is the last of 4 children, 2 of whom actually also graduated from schools in the Boston area. Indeed, the Northeastern Co-op program did play a major role in Kezia's decision to apply to Northeastern. I believe there is always a reason our students prioritize their college choices. And in the case of our daughter, Kezia, Northeastern was ultimately her first, her second, and her third choices, so to speak, for 2 main reasons. One reason was because, unlike other colleges, which had psychology and criminal justice as separate majors, Northeastern offered these as combined majors, which fit or aligned perfectly with her interests. Well, that was quite easy for me to understand. The other driving factor for her decision to go to Northeastern was the Northeastern Co-op program. Now, that got me thinking quite a bit, because up until then, I really didn't know what the co-op was all about. But recognizing that it was such a compelling reason for her to go to Northeastern, I decided to do a little bit of research. So I inquired a little bit from the school, did my own research, and I learned that for over 100 years, Northeastern has been a world leader in comparative education by alternating semesters of academic study with periods of full-time work across academic content. Well, with my traditional approach to learning and not really knowing what the co-op was all about, I was a bit skeptical about Kezia spending hours away from the classroom, working full-time for that matter, when really to us, she should be in the class learning. I, however, further learned that the Northeastern Co-op program was an experiential program, learning program, which would give her the opportunity to actually learn by doing and reflecting on her experiences. In other words, she would gain industry experience as part of her curriculum. Now, this was what really appealed to Kezia, and it did appeal to us as well. So fast forward by extension, as Demetrius has mentioned, she's completed 2 co-ops. The first was at the HR department of an investment company, Arrow Street Capital, and the second was at the Baker Center, a child therapy center. I must add that she found these co-ops through NUOX, which is the school's career management portal, and with the able support of her co-ops advisors. Her initial interest actually was in industrial psychology. She, however, realized that co-ops in this area were few and far between. So upon learning about the parallels between industrial psychology and human resource, she realigned her search to human resource co-ops, hence her time at the Arrow Street Capital, where she most of her work was centered around scheduling interviews and handling candidate information. Towards the end of this co-op, which by the way was all online because it was during the COVID restrictions, she shared with me that she didn't really feel connected to the job and she wanted a more hands-on placement. So she totally abandoned the idea of industrial psychology and decided to explore the world of clinical psychology. And hence her second co-op at the George Baker Center, where she actually had the opportunity to deal directly with children by scoring their mental health questionnaires and guiding parents through the assessment process. Every now and then she would have the opportunity to sit with the child and observe the child in the process, whilst the parent would be having a consultation with a clinician. Being able to help children develop their well-being, herself being a mental health advocate, gave her such fulfillment, great fulfillment. She knew that was what she wanted to do long-term. So I would say that through her co-ops, she was able to explore different career paths, and without a doubt, the real life experiences from both co-ops helped Kezia to affirm and solidify her career paths, her career path choices, which in turn influenced her course selection in the semesters to come. So from the practical experience she gained from her co-ops, she was able to gain a deeper understanding of what she learned in class. I must emphasize that the school does have a very good support system for students all through the co-op process, from the application through the job placements. However, from a parent's perspective, I would say that parents also do have a part to play in the co-op process. I find that as parents, we can easily fall into the temptation of thinking that our first-year students and sophomores now in college are actually mature. Well, yes and no. College can be a very daunting experience, and we know our students best, their weaknesses and their strengths. So knowledge is definitely power. I'll encourage parents to reach out to the school. The Northeastern has a very good resource piece. Reach out to the school and get all the information you can to support your children. Communication is absolute key. So by all means, keep in touch with your students all through the co-op process and all through their college life, especially. As an added support for your students, I encourage also parents to consider being involved in Northeastern as volunteers or supporters, or volunteers and supporters. I say so particularly because of the immense, as Demetrius mentioned, the immense benefits I have personally derived as a parent from my membership on the Dean's Strategic Council for the past 3 years. So briefly put, as a council, we act as a support group to the Dean, offering advice and ideas on pertinent college matters, amongst others. We also work with the Dean and advance the college's mission and strategic goals. In fact, one of the goals of the mission is to lead in the education of global citizens by combining academic rigor and experiential learning. And that is really what co-op is all about. So it also afforded me another opportunity to know more about the co-op program. As part of advancing the college's mission also, I have been involved with some faculty members in conversations on the college's Africa Global Initiative Program, which basically seeks to offer financial support to promising students in Africa who wish to study at Northeastern. No quota, I can assure you, in making this world a better place is too small. So I really encourage parents to consider their involvement in some of these endeavors. My involvement has been absolutely rewarding. And looking back thus far, I must say I have also been quite the student myself, totally unplanned, absolutely rewarding. Yeah, thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions you may have at the question and answer time.
Thank you very much, Alice. That was wonderful. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on the questions that are raised by parents. Okay, next, I'd like to introduce our co-op coordinators, Linnea Basu and Chrissy Beluk. Linnea Basu joined the College of Social Sciences and Humanities co-op program in 2008. She is currently a senior cooperative education coordinator, working primarily with undergraduate and graduate students, academic faculty, and employers in the economics program. She also serves as the college's co-op liaison to the Office of Global Services, specializing in issues for international students and co-op. Linnea has a BA in government from Colby College and an MS in College Student and Development Counseling from Northeastern University. Prior to coming to Northeastern, Linnea spent 5 years recruiting financial representatives and managing the summer internship program in Boston for Northwestern Mutual. Chrissy Beluk is Assistant Cooperative Education Coordinator here at Northeastern. She works with political science undergraduates and public administration and policy graduate students, as well as employer partners. Previously, Chrissy was the Assistant Director for Service at New York University, where she co-led the institutional-wide voting initiative, as well as local and global volunteer opportunities. Chrissy has a bachelor's in sociology and in human services from Northeastern University, and a master's in public administration from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service. Chrissy is a proud Husky alum, and she completed 3 co-ops as a student, including one in Cape Town, South Africa. Linnea and Chrissy, I turn the program over to you.
Thanks so much, Demetrius. It is nice to virtually meet all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to giving you an in-depth view of our co-op program. So the first thing I want to do is share a slide with you. Let's see, bear with me here. Okay, let's see here. Oops. Okay, so co-op is a form of experiential liberal arts, and I'm guessing that some of you may have, as I did, gone to a small liberal arts college, or had some types of liberal arts education, and we all have some sense of what a college education might include. But specifically, what we mean by experiential liberal arts is when you take all of the skills and experience that you learn in a traditional college classroom and transform them in some way. So specifically, today we're going to talk about co-op, but some of the other things or experiences, I should say, that students transform their knowledge is through certainly global studies, study abroad, independent research, service learning, and as I said before, co-op is certainly key in sort of transforming those skills. So to give you a little bit of background, Northeastern, as a very large co-op program, university-wide, we send out 4,000 or 5,000 students every 6 months. So about 10,000 students per year. In our college, we send out maybe just under 800 students in a calendar year or in an academic year. So if you're not familiar with co-op, what is it? What is cooperative education? What is this form of experiential learning? Co-op allows students to work full-time for 6 months in typically 6 months for a position that's related to their career interests and or major. And I say that career interests or major because they may or may not be connected, or it may be that your student has picked a career first and then a major, or vice versa. But it allows students to explore various paths. And I think, Alice talked about that with her daughter, Kezia's experience and kind of exploring multiple paths with psychology or law or criminal justice or what have you. So the program starts as early as the second half of your sophomore year. So if any of you are parents of first years, this is not something that your students are necessarily thinking about yet, but can start as early as the second half of your sophomore year and can go into either your second or third year or third or fourth year, whenever your student is ready for co-op. Because of the volume of our program, it's a structured program. Every student has a co-op coordinator. So what Chrissy and I do is we work with students, obviously, but we also work with employers. And we teach a prep course that every Northeastern student has to take prior to going out on their first co-op. I always tell students that I wish I had a class like this when I was in college, because our co-op prep class, besides just, as you might guess, is a class to prepare students to go out on the job market. It's really about skills that they need for a lifetime, writing a resume, looking at job descriptions, figuring out what they might, their skills and what they might like or not like in a workplace experience. And we also know too, at this generation, that they're going to not just have multiple jobs, they might have multiple careers in multiple industries. So certainly the process of writing a resume and interviewing and networking and job exploration, career exploration is something that they start now at Northeastern and will continue for some time. So that class, as I mentioned, it's taken the semester before a student goes out on co-op. It's designed to usher the student through the job search process. Then they go out on their co-op, and most of our students do 2 co-ops in 4 years. Chrissy will tell you more about her experience as the 5-year 3 co-op, which historically Northeastern was known for. And students will come out with, at least who do 2 co-ops, will come out with a year of work experience. So this is where they are not taking classes during this time, and many times they're doing a position that's very similar, if not the same, to what an entry-level person would do post-bachelor's. So they're there for a significant period of time at an employer to make a contribution to that employer and to take on, a full-time role for typically 6 months, though we have had some co-ops that go longer into 8 months or shorter into 4 months. So I guess just another kind of factor about logistics is sometimes folks wonder, like, well, is this sort of placements? Do my students get placed at a certain employer? It's very real world. The students have to apply to a position. NU Works is our database with hundreds of jobs. They apply, the employer chooses whether or not to interview them, and then they go through the process. And because we send so many hundreds of students out on co-op each cycle, it's not like it all the employers all recruit in 2 weeks. It takes a full semester. So it's a rolling process, which is, I tell students, kind of different than their college search process. And as I said, it gives them kind of a glimpse of what they will go through post-graduation. One thing I wanted to mention is if your student has a combined major, you still just have one co-op coordinator and you take one class, but you certainly can explore positions in both areas. And depending on your students' interests, you can apply to jobs that you're qualified for, even if it doesn't directly relate to your major, as long as you kind of meet the qualifications for those particular positions. And then one more note just before I hand it over to Chrissy is we do have a robust employer data, robust employer relationships. But that said, there many are in the Boston area. We have students that go to cities all over the world, around the country. We also have students that self-develop positions as well. And we see this particularly outside of Boston in an area that we may not have a co-op in. If a student says, oh, I want to work in Minneapolis, do you have co-ops there? And we don't, or we don't have what they're looking for, a student may work with their co-op coordinator to help them self-develop, or, to kind of meet what they're looking for. So Chrissy will take it over on sort of some of the other logistics.
Sure. Thank you so much, Linnea. And thank you all for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I'll keep talking a little bit about some of the logistics of co-op and a little bit of the differences. How is this different than an internship? And then I'll share a little bit about my story as an undergrad that might be relevant to the folks on the call who may have students at home. So I think one of the other big things that is really unique about the co-op program compared to an internship is the length of time, the duration that you are participating in the work that you're there for. It's full-time, which is very different than most internships. It's not just a few weeks over the summer. It's not just a few hours during a really busy semester of school. You're really able to dedicate all of your attention, and the employers really appreciate that, and they begin to treat you as though you're going to be able to contribute meaningful work because it grasps your full attention. So from a student perspective, it's really wonderful being able to really focus in on just one area of focus to completely immerse yourself in that culture. And then for employers, it's also really nice having that reliable, dependable student who's going to be there for a long period of time with predictable turnover. So if you're going to be with the co-op program for a while, you know that you're going to have co-op students coming in, and students have a lot of energy. They take our prep class and they're really excited to get going, and they often have a really strong work ethic and are eager to learn and eager to contribute. The other thing that's different about the co-op opportunity is that most of them are paid, and so you don't take classes during that time. You're still considered a student, which is wonderful. If you're co-oping in Boston, you can still go to the gym after work. You can still participate in all the events and fun things going on and have that college community, being involved with clubs, but you're not paying tuition. So you're just paying for housing. The types of jobs that students are typically getting while they're on co-op are similar to entry-level positions that you would get after you graduated. So that's the kind of field. The types of co-ops in the College of Social Sciences really vary. We have a lot of diverse, interested groups of students that are working with us. And I feel like with the combined majors, we have even more interests, which is really exciting. So the kinds of jobs are specific for the student, but they vary from working with nonprofit organizations. We have co-ops with the Attorney General's office. We have co-ops at legal firms. Linnea works with a lot of the economics and business organizations in the school. So it really depends on the student, but we have a lot of variety. And I like to tell the students that I'm working with that how unique this opportunity is too. When you're a student at another university, perhaps you're fighting for all of the internships that are available for every undergraduate student. But these Northeastern co-op ones are specific for the Northeastern students who are in our program on our timeline, and employers really appreciate that. So it's a really wonderful benefit. I can share a little bit about my own experience too. I was a transfer student to Northeastern, and a lot of that was because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my life, as many 18-year-olds don't have that completely figured out yet. And I was studying sociology classes, and I really, really enjoyed learning about the complexities of social problems. But I was finding myself getting quite frustrated because I was like, I'm learning all of this awesome information, but how are we fixing this? What are we doing? And it was through an experiential learning experience where I was volunteering in Washington, D.C., where I was participating in service work with different nonprofit organizations, having conversations with policymakers, where I realized I needed to be at a school where that was a priority. And I didn't know co-op existed in this robust way, but Northeastern was a perfect fit for me, as I was able to continue studying these social problems through the sociology perspective, and then with human services, learn about all of the different ways that we are alleviating those. And I approached my co-ops learning about the different fields, wanting to get experience to see what does it look like to do direct care with people? What does it look like if you're in a larger organization or an agency? So that was really beneficial as I was a student kind of doing this exploration path. And I worked in Boston at a different, at an advertising agency, which was really wonderful. They only communicated with nonprofits and that was their clients. So it was really interesting to learn about the communication component of public agencies and nonprofit organizations. My second co-op, I worked at Northeastern University, which is how I learned about the field of higher education, doing the service learning program and working with students and community partners and faculty members. And my final co-op was in Cape Town, South Africa with the social enterprise Green Pop, where they focus on doing tree planting, sustainability efforts, which was a really wonderful experience. So all of those contributed to my development, my understanding of how I wanted to help create positive change. And I think it was a wonderful way to really dive deep. I don't think the experiences I had, I would have been able to do taking classes part-time. So that's a little bit about my experience. I could happy to talk more if people are interested. But I think in terms of other things that you should know about global co-op or out-of-state co-ops is that we have a wide variety of global co-op opportunities that are available. So students co-op all over the world, which is quite exciting. And then all throughout the country too, we have probably the most in CSSH in New York right now, with growing numbers in California, North Carolina has some, and then many also in Washington, D.C., which is really wonderful. Students often ask me about housing when it comes to these different opportunities, because you're leaving Boston, you're not necessarily on campus anymore. And Northeastern also has resources to help students with that transitional process too. So a little bit about the logistics of global co-ops, a little bit about me. Linnea, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. So I think Alice spoke to this, but in terms of how you can best support your student while they're going through this process, certainly I think encourage them to be curious and to seek information, whether it's, you know, networking with family and friends that maybe they've known for years, but they've never actually asked, you know, what do you do? What's your profession? So encouraging them to have those conversations, maybe talking to them about your own journey with the world of work and with careers. Encourage them to be flexible, to be open-minded, and certainly, I mean, students come to us at all points in their career trajectory. Some are very focused. I want to go to law school. I want to be a financial analyst. I want to whatever. And then some really do not know. And they know they're in the right major and they like their major, but they don't know exactly what to do with it. So ensure them that career decision-making isn't necessarily linear, even if it was for you. And people, you know, encourage them that or tell them that it's about trying things out and finding what you like and what you don't like. And I think also the process does take time, and students, you know, have to take it seriously, which I think really they do, because it's we have a lot of wonderful opportunities, but it's competitive, and I think, you know, a job isn't going to necessarily fall from the sky, meaning if they're not, you know, prepared for interviews and so forth. So they have to do what we tell them, which is what the course is all about. And I think if they do that, they're going to be successful. And also if they do sort of seem stressed about some of the unknowns, when will I hear from employers, encourage them to talk to us. That's why we're here. You know, to have you talk to your co-op coordinator, have you met with your co-op coordinator, and also assure them that some of the unknowns of the job search process are just part of it. You might not know exactly when you're going to get your co-op. That's okay, and tell them sort of your story about when you maybe have last looked for a job. So I think that's kind of
Great.
our
Thank
overview.
you. Yeah, thank you, Linnea and Chrissy. That was fantastic. So we'll now have time to answer all your questions. I see a couple have already started pouring into the chat. We're going to continue muting the participants just to ensure optimal audio, but feel free to drop your questions into the chat. I will group them together if they seem to be related with one another, just to make sure that we get through as many of the topics or themes that may come up. We also have a few questions that were submitted by parents during the registration process. So I will intersperse some of those questions when they seem relevant as well. So the first question from Jeffrey Gandon, what support is available to students during the actual co-op?
I can talk about this. It's a great question. I have a bunch of students who are just about to embark on co-op, and that was one of the last things that I said to them in our final class, that I'm not going anywhere, and we support you throughout the entire duration. So the co-op coordinator that you have, you're able to communicate with them all throughout, whether there are wonderful things going on, whether you're navigating an interesting challenge at work. We spend the co-op class talking a lot about how to succeed in the workplace, but for many people, this is the first time they might be showing up for an office for 40 hours a week. That was, a big surprise to me, just how exhausted you could be at the end of a work week, those 40 hours. It was a bit of a shocker. And whatever the challenge might be, whether it be learning how to communicate efficiently with a manager or how to juggle different projects, if you're being asked to do lots of different things, we can help set up time. Well, we will set up time with the students to coach them through whatever may be going on. So the co-op coordinators are always a great resource.
Thank you very much. Second question from Lisa. Do students receive credits toward graduation for their co-op?
Sure, I'll take this one. Good question. So co-op is, they don't receive academic credit, but what they do receive is they fulfill their experiential learning graduation requirement, which a majority of students do through co-op. So co-op shows up on their transcript as co-op work experience. Again, they're not charged tuition because they're not taking classes during that time, but they are still considered a full-time student. So all their health insurance and so forth, whatever they have in place as student, that still stands, and their housing. But they are, earning a salary. The majority is paid positions. So I saw someone in the chat, I know this wasn't exactly related to this, but taxes and those sorts of things. Yeah, we do have some resources for some students in regards to taxes. We aren't really qualified to give tax advice, but certainly we talk a little bit in the class towards the end of the class of how to properly sort of fill out the forms and why taxes are taken out, and why it's not a good idea to just not have taxes taken out, because you'll be stuck with a big bill at the end.
Great, thank you. We do have a question that was submitted during the registration process for our parent host. Alice, how much did your student communicate with you during the search process?
Well, to be honest, there wasn't much communication. There wasn't the need, apart from her telling us where she was applying to and why. She had a lot of support from the school's resource. So the school provided excellent support through NUOX and her co-op advisors, who helped with her resume, her job search, and her interview process. So really, I didn't do much in that regard at all. The school provided all the support that she needed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A question related to We talked earlier about self-developed co-ops. Do any students source their own co-ops, or does Northeastern source 100% from Brian?
Another great question. So Northeastern has a robust list of employer partners that are really eager to hire Northeastern students for co-op specifically. However, that robust list of thousands of co-ops job does not meet the interest of every current student. And if that's the case, the co-op advisors can help support them in potentially creating their own. That's actually a way that a lot of employers learn about the co-op program, is like Northeastern students reaching out, and then they're like, this is a great idea. All right, we would love to keep making sure students come back. So we have materials and resources for students who, if they don't see a position that they're interested in, or maybe they have their mind set on something that isn't local in Boston that they'd want to do, we can help work with them. But I would say most students utilize NUWorks to find their co-op.
That's great. Thank you. I think I'll jump to a related question. Are all co-ops available to students, or are they limited to certain co-ops based on their major? That's from Noah.
Sure. So I think there is certainly overlap with what our students might be interested in. We do have students, particularly because I work with economics students, there's a lot of overlap with business. And we do have students that are looking at the for-profit sector, interested in consulting, doing those types of co-ops or financial services. So I think with positions, as long as you meet the basic qualifications, and the example I usually give is that, you know, a political science major is probably not going to be qualified for a nursing job or a software engineering job unless they have come from that area and have the specific technical skills. So I would say outside of like engineering, some heavy programming CS jobs, maybe architecture and, you know, nursing or physical therapy, they can apply to jobs within their major, within their college, outside our college. When we talk about outside our college, we mean amongst the 8 or 9 colleges of Northeastern, art, media, and design, or the College of Science, or the College of Bouvet is health sciences. But as I said, you know, those positions tend to require more of a technical skill set. So, and it's something that we work with students on. Are you qualified for the job or not? Do you know if you're qualified? Another thing too I wanted to mention is that sometimes the first co-op might be a positioning co-op, meaning that, you know, they may not have the skills and experience to go into investment banking or something, but they just need an office job. They need to kind of build that experience before they go and, I don't know, clerk for a Supreme Court justice, or, as I said, investment banking tends to be popular in economics. But so kind of just, we do spend a lot of time managing expectations and talking about how to kind of get to the path that you want to go to, or if you don't know that path, kind of just how to, you know, narrow things in or narrow things out.
Thanks so much. I think a related question, and I'm skipping one, but I'll come back to it. Is it possible that a co-op could overlap an additional semester? So if you're taking a co-op in the sophomore spring, does that overlap with, say, the next fall semester?
Some students do get asked to work part-time on their co-op if they have a really positive experience. That is up to the employer and the student. Typically, the co-op cycle is 6 months at a time. So once you're done with your co-op, you will go back into classes, but the world works in a lot of different ways. So if you have opportunity in your schedule and to continue working on or taking on a part-time component, that could be a part-time job, but it wouldn't be considered a co-op because it wouldn't be full-time. Does that answer the question?
Well, we'll find out when we get an answer
I
in the chat.
suppose so. Yeah.
So I do have a question for Alice again. This one is related to, and there's a related question in the chat as well. So what, if you don't mind us asking, did you see a difference between your daughter's stress levels during the first and second co-op searches?
Well, because she didn't really have a hands-on experience with her first co-op, she felt quite unfulfilled. And that wasn't her expectation when she started. I saw a huge change after her second co-op, because that is actually what she felt fulfilled in, and actually where she would want to drive her interests for a long term. So yes, there was a big difference between her experiences and her mature, her experiences between the first and the second co-ops. Yes.
Great, thank you. Tammy is asking, my son had a second interview for a co-op in New York, still not solidified, which is a little stressful when it comes to trying to find housing. They said another 2 weeks for a decision. Is that normal? Is it okay to follow up and advise that they need to find housing before the start date? Or is that not appropriate? Linnea or Chrissy?
I think we were trying to figure out whose turn it was.
I was wondering too. I might have just had a phone call with the student. I wonder who your son is. So essentially, in this very similar situation, I was talking to the student and saying that you can have communications with who the recruiting team on the other end of that phone call, and let them know of your timeline and ask politely for an update. I think often I have had a lot of questions from students this semester, just like how to navigate that hiring cycle process. And, you have to figure out the logistics of where you're going to live. That's not inappropriate to ask. I think it's just figuring out how to have that conversation in a way that would be positive for everybody. So the way I ended the conversation with the student I just had was talking about how we could draft an email and send that to the employer so that they would feel like they had some support, that I looked at it, we talked about it together, but it's definitely fine to communicate with it. Let's see, does that answer all of that?
Yeah, so you mentioned, since we're talking about housing, there's a question here from Lisa about housing. Is housing covered if the student does their co-op in Boston? And what if it's abroad? And that links to a related question from Brian about whether second year students can do a global co-op.
Yeah, so in terms of housing, if you think about it, certainly there's a lot of students that, for logistical reasons, their friends are here and everything, do want to stay in Boston for co-op. So that means their housing wouldn't change or would be the same as if they were a student. Meaning, like, let's say if they're a second year and they're on campus now and they're going to live on campus while they're on co-op, they wouldn't move. If you have a student, maybe they're looking at their second co-op and they're off campus, it would be kind of the same thing. They're either off campus while they're taking 4 classes or while they're working. In terms of the relocation piece, so Northeastern has leased housing in several cities, New York, San Francisco, Chicago. We did have some in DC for a while as well, but it basically, that makes the relocation process a little bit easier. If the thought of finding some apartment to live in New York City is daunting, which to many of us it would be, then a student can find like sort of a dorm type setup, and sort of pay the housing rate, maybe just a little bit more than what they would pay if they live in on-campus housing at Northeastern. And San Francisco, I know the housing is a pretty, or is a better deal than they could probably get on their own. In terms of a global co-op, we have colleagues, and because international affairs is, really students in that major heavily need to go abroad, want to go abroad. So we have a whole kind of module to prepare students to go on global co-op, to consider all the logistics, visas, and housing. I have a student that's going to Ireland, and the first thing after she got her offer that I did was put her in touch with the other students that are going to Ireland, so they can all talk about housing and kind of work together. And we have a specific Beyond Boston like housing resource. So sometimes if a student's going to New York, they might pair up and decide to, you know, get an apartment with a couple of their NU buddies that are also on co-op, or they might just be like, you know, the easiest thing for me to do is just sign up for the room and the NU housing at New York. But yeah, that's certainly something they should think about. And I think going back to the original question of this kind of second year go on global co-op, are they ready? You know, it's a global co-op is very different than study abroad. So that's the conversation they should have with their advisor, they should have with you. And sometimes students stay in Boston for the first co-op and then they consider doing a global co-op, or maybe vice versa.
Hey, thank you so much. One of the questions submitted in the chat are all co-ops paid? And if a co-op is not paid, should my students still consider it?
That's a great question too. I think a majority of co-ops are paid. So there are a handful in the College of Social Sciences that are unpaid, and those are primarily co-op opportunities in the federal government or the Attorney General's office, and they're wonderful opportunities for students. So it really depends on what their financial support is for that semester, if they're going to be like taking on living expenses while not getting paid. We have a handful of scholarships that are at the university that are funded through generous alumni and donors, and those scholarships really help support the students who aren't able to take on perhaps an unpaid co-op otherwise. And so those are really wonderful resources because they're excellent co-ops, but the government isn't going to be able to start paying them. So if you are hoping to work at the Attorney General's office, you have to have a conversation with your co-op advisor to make sure you're feasibly able to do it. But the scholarship opportunities are great, a great resource for that. So I would consider that. Along with that, the global co-ops, typically, depending on what country and what field you're pursuing, those wouldn't be paid either, but there's another scholarship designated for students who are interested in co-oping abroad that they can apply to as well.
I think I'd just add to that it really does depend on what the student is looking for. You know, with my major, it's more rare for a student to take an unpaid co-op because most of them do end up in the private sector. And as Chrissy said, it's specifically federal government jobs. So the one she's thinking of at the U.S. Attorney's Office, part of the Department of Justice, great position, hasn't been paid ever as a co-op and won't be. But I think we develop positions with employers and expecting that they will be paid because you know, sort of that's the program. And as I said, in the private sector, it's a strong job market, but we want to give students realistic expectations. You know, this is not a major in our college, but the music industry program, you know, those students, the money is kind of at the top, but if the students, a lot of the positions, it's just the nature of the industry, might be sort of unpaid. So I think another pretty neat thing about NU Works is that it usually does list a salary, a range, so that if you have someone that really like, if your student needs to budget for their tuition, for their rent, for their living expenses, they can do that. And I tell students, you know, we want you to apply to an unpaid position only if it's feasible for you. You know, we don't want to, you know, have you waste your time and the employer's time as kind of like a backup or something. It should be that the experience of giving up a potential salary is worth it. And that goes back to, I think, the funding for unpaid can really help, because if not, those employers definitely get less applicants. I mean, especially when the majority of the positions, or the domestic positions particularly, are paid.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have a
Demetrius,
couple of, yes, Alice?
Yes, Demetrius, can I also just add to that, as Chrissy said, I think it really depends on what the student is looking for. Because going by Kezia's experience, her first co-op, which was a paid co-op, was the one she actually didn't feel attached to. She didn't enjoy that co-op. And it was the second co-op, which was not a paid co-op. That's the co-op that she really enjoyed most. So I think it really depends on what the student is looking for. And yes, the monetary aspect of it is important, but I think the experience is also quite beneficial and it's something that the student should be looking at as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a question here about after co-op, do students write or submit a response or report about, I suppose, their co-op experience?
We have students do reflection projects. Each co-op coordinator has different types of reflection projects that they'll do throughout the duration of their co-op. We check in with them, so they have very brief reflection prompts that they're engaging with while they're on co-op. And then afterwards, we'll do group reflections. Most co-op advisors in CSSH host those where they get to hear about their peers' experience as well as share about theirs. And it'll either be a paper, but the other thing that we've been really pushing for lately, which has been really wonderful to see, are these poster presentations. So you can see this online right now. It's College of Social Sciences co-op posters. I can pop it in the chat in a second, but they've been really wonderful too. And then we have a big expo where we get to share all of the posters. So students get to practice talking about their co-op experience. Undergrads who are on the hunt for a co-op can start looking at different opportunities and engage with the students who have had it. I think so much of reading a job description really doesn't tell you what it's like to be in an environment, have that hands-on experience where you're working full-time. So building those connections is really wonderful. Oh, there we go. That's the poster link. So you can browse through, and that's from the student voice and some experience of what it was like. So we do papers, but a lot of students also submit posters, which has been wonderful.
Great. And since we've got you, Chrissy, on the line, you had answered the question earlier about whether or not a co-op can continue after the completion of the co-op cycle. The follow-up question was, the parent was wondering whether the actual co-op would go over into the following semester, thereby or thus delaying the start of the next semester.
I got it. I'm glad there was a follow-up. The way that Northeastern works is that the semesters won't interfere with your co-op. That's the quick way to explain it. The summer is broken up into two sections. So you have summer 1 and summer 2. And the way students are able to graduate in 4 years in that time frame is by taking summer classes either at the beginning or the end. So your co-op will either go towards the beginning of summer 1, that's when it'll start, or it will end at it'll start at summer 2 and begin in summer 1. So the way that the timetable works out is that you don't interrupt.
And
excellent.
We can actually add to that I don't know if I mentioned this initially, but the typical co-op cycle are January to June and July through December. And which typically means if students, obviously they're not taking classes while they're on co-op, so they would work with their academic advisor to figure out if they're going to take 2 classes in one of the summers to kind of make up for those classes that they didn't take during the semester.
Great.
And
we have time for,
okay, go ahead,
sorry.
please.
Well, we have time for one last quick question. Can the student end on a co-op, or do they have to end taking classes? So presumably end meaning graduating the semester, in which they're on co-op.
Undergraduate students have to graduate taking classes, so you don't graduate while you are on co-op.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much, Alice, Linnea, and Chrissy. At this time, we'll need to start wrapping up. I hope you enjoyed this evening's event and that you have found it informative. We are very gratified that you entrusted your students' education to Northeastern. We'd be delighted to answer any additional questions you may have about co-op or about supporting Northeastern students. The slide you're viewing right now has our contact information. I'd like to thank Alice for her participation in this event. She has been an inspirational Dean Strategy Council member for the last 3 years and a very dedicated supporter of Northeastern students. Many alumni, parents, and friends support our students and our co-op program with their time and their philanthropy. If you would like to learn how, please let us know. Many thanks also to Linnea and Chrissy for their commitment to co-op and to our students. Northeastern students, I learned during my time working with our alumni, forged some of their most meaningful faculty relationships with our co-op team. And I think after hearing from them yourselves, you can understand why. There are many individuals, too many to name right now, that made this event possible, but two of my colleagues in university advancement deserve special recognition for their important roles tonight, Diana Bronchuk and especially Serena Hertz. This concludes our event. Thank you all and good night.